In my family, I was always the reliable one. Rachel will handle it. Rachel will step in. Rachel will pay. The years passed in a constant state of readiness, as if my life was just a spare battery for everyone else's needs. I didn't complain. I truly believed that was how things were supposed to be. Until one dinner when I found out my vacation had already been planned for me, filled with other people's children, other people's schedules, and other people's priorities. And that, I wasn't a guest. I was a resource. That night, for the first time, I didn't say yes, and I discovered that silence after saying no can echo louder than any argument. I drove home and quietly packed my suitcase, not for Yellowstone. I wasn't going there anymore. 3 days later, I sat staring at the empty hills of New Mexico, thinking about how many years I had lived according to someone else's script. And it had all started with one simple conversation in my parents' kitchen. My name is Rachel. I'm 35 years old and I live in Seattle. I work as a senior attorney at a consulting firm. I'm not married and I don't have children, but I have a quiet apartment, a steady income, and the ability to be calm when everything else feels loud. My younger sister Kim has 3 kids and always sounds like she's both asking and demanding at the same time. My brother Dylan likes to joke, but he always finds a way to pass responsibility onto someone else. When they said they wanted to plan a trip to Yellowstone for Mom's birthday, I was actually excited. It felt like a good idea. We hadn't done anything together in a long time, and I thought it would make Mom happy. I liked the thought of us all being in one place, maybe sharing meals, hiking, relaxing by a fire. Kim told me it would cost $2,000 each for rental cabins, food, and travel expenses. I didn't hesitate. I transferred the money that same evening. I felt useful, included, like I had a real place in the family. After that, though, things went quiet. Whenever I asked about the plans, dates, schedule, details, Kim would say not to worry. She always said they'd handle everything. So I didn't press. I assumed I'd get the info when it was time. I took the week off work, cleared my calendar, and even started browsing for warm layers since I didn't own much winter gear. It felt good to plan something for family, even if I was usually the one who had to adjust. Then came dinner at Mom and Dad's house. The usual group, my parents, Kim and her kids, Dylan, my aunt and cousins. The house was loud, filled with kids and laughter, the smell of baked chicken and mashed potatoes in the air. It was one of those nights when everything looks normal on the outside. But then Kim said something that didn't sit right. She said I should come up to the resort a day early. I thought she meant to help set up, but then she added something like, "So you can take the kids while we go on the tours." It took a second to hit me. I thought maybe I misunderstood, but she looked at me like this had already been decided. I looked around the table, but no one seemed surprised. My parents were quiet. Dylan was busy with his phone. I asked, "You want me to watch all the kids?" And Kim smiled like it was obvious, like I should have known. She said I didn't have a husband or kids, so it was easier for me. That was her reason. It was like a switch flipped in my chest. Everything suddenly felt smaller, tighter. I tried to speak, but my throat closed up. I sat through the rest of dinner, barely touching my food, while everyone chatted about ski trails and hot springs and group dinners. I sat there thinking about how many times I dropped everything for them. Late night babysitting, wiring money for car repairs, helping with applications and resumes, holidays spent cooking and cleaning while they rested. All of that, and this is how they saw me? Not a guest, not a sister, just a helper, a background figure. I left early that night. I said I had work in the morning. No one stopped me. No one followed me out. I got in my car and drove through the quiet streets, not turning on the radio. When I got home, I sat in the dark living room, still in my coat, just trying to breathe through the lump in my throat. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying everything, every moment where I'd chosen their needs over mine. And now, when I thought I was finally invited as part of the family, I was just part of the logistics. They took my money, my vacation days, and my silence as a yes. And I had no one to blame but myself, because I never said no before. I trained them to expect me to be available, always, even at the cost of myself. And maybe they weren't even trying to be cruel. Maybe it was just habit. I gave and they took. I never asked for anything in return. So they stopped seeing me as someone who might need space, care, or rest too. Still, the sting of that dinner didn't go away. The way they talked about the trip, about how everything was already arranged, made me feel invisible, like the plans were done, and I was just a footnote, a name on a babysitter list. It wasn't the first time I'd felt this in the family, but it was the first time I didn't try to explain or fix it. I didn't ask for clarity. I didn't send a follow-up message. I just let it sit. That night, I opened my calendar and stared at the week I'd blocked off. 7 days that were supposed to be for family, rest, something good. And suddenly, I knew I didn't want to spend those days in a rental cabin with 5 kids while everyone else drank wine and took selfies on mountaintops. I wanted something else. I wasn't sure what yet, but I knew it couldn't be that. I turned off my phone and sat in silence, not checking my work email, not replying to the family group chat. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like air after being underwater too long. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about stepping back, but I also knew something was coming, something louder than silence. And when it did, I would have to choose again. I just didn't know yet how far I'd be willing to go. Dinner at my parents' house was as noisy as ever. The kids were running around the living room, throwing toys and shouting over one another. My mom was busy in the kitchen, rushing between the stove and the table, making sure the food didn't burn and everyone had what they needed. My dad sat at the head of the table, telling a story about a snowstorm he once drove through in Wyoming, laughing before he even got to the punchline. The air was thick with the smell of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, and everything seemed ordinary, the way family dinners usually feel, warm, messy, loud. I had just taken my seat and reached for a bread roll when Kim, without even looking up from her plate, casually dropped the sentence that changed everything. She said I'd be arriving a day earlier than the rest so I could take care of the kids while she and Dylan went on tours with Mom and Dad. She said it like it was already arranged, like I had agreed weeks ago and this was just a reminder. It took me a moment to process what she meant. I asked her what she was talking about. She looked at me with surprise, like I was being difficult for no reason. She said, of course, I'd be watching the kids. Jason, Emma's baby, Dylan's twins, even Rachel's son. 5 kids in total. Because I didn't have a husband or children, she said it would be easier for me. I was free. That was the word she used. The room went quiet for a second. Even Mom, who was halfway through pouring gravy, froze. No one laughed. No one corrected her. Everyone just waited for me to nod and say sure, like I always did. I asked why no one had asked me first, why they all assumed I'd be fine with that. My voice wasn't angry. Not yet. It was small and tired, like I already knew the answer, but needed to hear someone say it out loud. Dylan shrugged and told me not to be dramatic. He said I always helped, and they were counting on that. Counting on me. Those were his exact words. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was an expectation, a decision made without me in the room. And I realized something in that moment. They didn't invite me on the trip because they wanted me there. They invited the version of me that serves a purpose, fills a gap, solves a problem. They invited the babysitter, the helper, the reliable extra pair of hands. Not the sister, not the daughter, not the woman who might want to rest too, who might want to explore Yellowstone, take pictures, drink coffee by a lake in silence. I sat through another 10 minutes of dinner, not saying much. Everyone went back to their conversations like nothing had happened. Kim talked about snow boots she ordered online. Dylan joked about trying snowboarding for the first time. Mom kept asking if anyone wanted more green beans. I felt like I was floating just above the table, watching it all from a distance. Eventually, I pushed my plate away and stood up. I said I wasn't feeling well and needed to go. No one stopped me. No one followed me out. I put on my coat, walked to my car, and sat there with the engine off, hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding like I'd just run a mile. My food was still sitting heavy in my stomach, untouched. My jaw felt tight. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. That night at home, I tried to sleep but couldn't. I lay in bed replaying the conversation over and over. Their tone, their faces, how normal it all felt to them. How they had planned around me, not with me. I was an invisible line on their schedule. Drop off the kids with Rachel, easy. She'll manage. I thought about all the years I had been this person for them, the one who leaves work early, the one who wires money without asking questions, the one who listens but rarely speaks, the one who shows up, always. And I wondered, when did I agree to be this person? When did I stop being seen? The next morning, I looked at my suitcase in the corner of the bedroom. I had started packing the night before, thinking I'd need gloves and wool socks and thermal layers. I stared at it for a long time and realized I didn't want to go. Not like this. Not when I wasn't really wanted. Not when I was just a service, not a guest. I didn't text anyone that day. I turned off my phone, took a walk through my neighborhood, and let the cold Seattle air sting my face. I bought myself a coffee and sat by the window of a small cafe I liked, watching strangers walk past. I listened to my own breath, to the sounds around me, to the quiet voice inside that said, "You don't have to keep doing this." I wasn't angry yet. I was still somewhere between disbelief and sadness, still holding out a little hope that someone, anyone, might realize how wrong this was. That maybe Mom would call and say they had changed their minds, that I was coming as a guest, not a favor. That maybe someone would remember I was a person too. But no one did. And the silence made one thing clear. This wasn't a mistake. It was just how they saw me. And that realization was the moment everything started to shift. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing outside. But mostly I was listening to Kim's voice replaying over and over in my head. She said I didn't have a family, so it was easier for me. Just like that. Like my life was some kind of temporary situation. Like I was in a holding pattern, waiting to become real. As if the absence of a husband and kids made me more available, more convenient, less deserving of rest. It wasn't just what she said. It was how natural it sounded coming from her. How no one had blinked. That sentence lived in my chest like a heavy rock for hours. By morning, something in me had hardened. Not into anger yet, but into something like clarity. I didn't want to fight with anyone. I didn't want to cause drama. But I also didn't want to disappear inside this role they'd written for me. I wanted to offer a solution, a fair one. So I picked up the phone and called my mom. I told her I would pay for a professional babysitter to come along for the trip. I would cover the full cost. That way, everyone could relax and enjoy the vacation, including me. There was silence on the other end of the line. It dragged on just a little too long before she spoke. She said no. She said the kids were used to me, not strangers, that it wouldn't work with someone they didn't know. I said I wanted to be part of the celebration too. I said I had taken time off to spend time with family, not to watch kids alone. She said it wouldn't be a good fit for me anyway. She said the trip would be loud, chaotic, full of people and activity, and that I didn't enjoy that kind of thing. She said I'd be uncomfortable. I sat there holding the phone in my hand, staring at the screen long after the call ended. It felt like someone had quietly shut a door in my face. It wasn't an argument. It was just closed, decided. I wasn't invited to the celebration. I was expected to support it from the background. I realized then that they didn't care if I wanted to be part of it. They needed me in the role they assigned, and that was it. An hour later, Kim called. Her voice was calm, even cheerful in that slightly forced way she always used when trying to get her way. She said the plans were set. Everything was organized. She told me not to ruin it. She said I should be mature about it. There was no anger in her voice, just pressure. Like she had made peace with what she needed from me and now expected me to fall in line. I listened to her speak, my hand resting on my desk next to my closed laptop. She talked for a while. I didn't say anything. I just let her words drift over me like a script she'd read too many times before. When she hung up, I didn't call back. I didn't text. I didn't try to explain. I just sat there thinking about how familiar this all felt. The expectations, the guilt, the assumption that I would always come through. And I realized for the first time that I didn't owe them my silence anymore, or my time, or my obedience. I closed my laptop slowly, stood up, and walked to my closet. I pulled out my suitcase and placed it on the bed. Then I opened my phone and typed 5 words into the search bar: Santa Fe hotels with balcony. I didn't know why I picked Santa Fe. Maybe it was the desert. Maybe it was the idea of open skies and quiet nights. Maybe I just needed somewhere that wasn't here. Somewhere I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. I found a small hotel just outside the historic center. It had warm-colored walls, clay tiles, and a balcony that overlooked the hills. The photos showed soft evening light falling across white sheets and blue ceramic mugs on the windowsill. It looked peaceful. I booked it without thinking twice. Then I bought a plane ticket. First class. Direct flight. I didn't check anyone's schedule or ask for permission. I didn't even think about the cost. I had the money. And for once, I wasn't going to spend it making someone else's life easier. After everything was confirmed, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my phone. I looked at the family group chat, but didn't open it. I didn't want to see the new pictures, the jokes, the reminders. I didn't want to be pulled back into the loop of performing my part. So I muted it and set the phone face down on the table. That evening, I started packing. Not the careful packing I usually did for family trips. Extra clothes for the kids in case of accidents, medicine, chargers, snacks. This time it was just for me. A few soft dresses, comfortable shoes, a book I hadn't had time to read in months. I folded everything slowly, neatly, feeling like I was preparing not just for a trip, but for something I had needed for a very long time. Something I hadn't even known I was missing. As I zipped up my suitcase, I felt a strange stillness settle in my chest. Like everything inside had been moving too fast for too long, and now it was finally slowing down. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel anxious. I just felt ready. Ready to leave. Ready to rest. Ready to not explain myself for once. And somewhere deep down, I knew this trip wasn't just about a vacation. It was the beginning of something else. I just didn't know yet what that something would become. I flew out 2 days later without saying anything to anyone. No announcements, no explanations. I packed my bag, locked my apartment, and headed to the airport in the early morning while the city was still half asleep. The flight to New Mexico was quiet. I kept to myself, didn't speak to the woman next to me, didn't look at my phone. As soon as we landed, I turned it off completely. I didn't want to see messages. I didn't want to hear my name. I didn't want to be reminded of the role I was supposed to play and had finally stepped out of. The air in New Mexico was dry and warm, even in the middle of winter. The sky was wide and pale, with soft clouds that moved slowly across the horizon. It felt like there was more room to breathe here. I took a taxi to the hotel, a small adobe-style building with curved edges and soft colors. When I opened the door to my room, I stood still for a moment, letting the quiet settle over me. No TV, no kids, no lists of things to do. Just sunlight coming in through the windows and the sound of wind outside. The room had a small balcony with 2 chairs and a clay flower pot full of green herbs. That first morning, I made coffee in the little machine on the desk and carried my cup outside. I sat in one of the chairs, wrapped in a soft sweater, and watched the hills in the distance. I didn't check my watch. I didn't open a laptop. I just sat and sipped and let the warmth of the cup settle into my hands. For the first time in years, I felt like I didn't owe anyone anything. I wasn't late. I wasn't responsible. I wasn't anyone's backup plan. I spent the next 2 days walking through the old streets of Santa Fe. I visited a museum. I ate alone in a quiet cafe where no one looked twice at a woman reading a book over lunch. I bought a handmade mug from a local shop and carried it back to the hotel wrapped in tissue paper. I didn't feel lonely. I felt clear, like something that had been muddy inside me was finally settling. On the third morning, I picked up my phone for the first time. I turned it on and let it buzz for several seconds before I touched anything. Dozens of missed calls, a flood of messages, voice memos, texts, all time-stamped from the same day and hour, exactly when the family was supposed to arrive at my house. I listened to the first voice message. It was short, just my sister asking where I was, saying they were outside with the kids. The next one came quickly after. Someone saying the children were restless. Then more, Kim asking why I wasn't picking up. Dylan saying they had followed the plan. My mother's voice cracking, saying she didn't understand what I was doing. One after another, the messages built into a wall of confusion and panic. Then the tone changed. The messages became sharper, angry, accusations, disbelief, words I never thought I'd hear from my own family. Selfish, cold, thoughtless. They said I had ruined everything, that the trip was falling apart, that the kids were upset, that mom was crying, that the whole vacation had turned into a disaster. They wanted answers. They wanted me to fix it. They wanted me to be who I had always been. But something had shifted in me, and I couldn't go back. I read their words like they belonged to strangers, like I was watching someone else's life unravel from behind a glass wall. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel regret. I felt something simpler. I felt done. They had expected me to be there at my house, ready with snacks and games and extra blankets. They had expected me to greet them at the door with a smile and take 5 kids off their hands so they could enjoy their vacation. They hadn't thought to confirm. They hadn't asked. They had just assumed I would fall into place the way I always did. And now they were shocked that I hadn't. I turned the phone over on the table and walked outside to the balcony again. The light was softer that afternoon. The hills looked further away somehow, but still peaceful. I sat down with a blanket wrapped around my legs and watched the sun lower in the sky. I thought about how many years I had been stuck in that quiet loop of saying yes, being good, helping, fixing, and how easy it had been for them to write me into their plans without checking if I was okay with it. But this time, I had stepped out of the loop, and I knew the fallout hadn't even started yet. When I got home, the apartment felt exactly the same. The shoes by the door, the scent of my vanilla candle still faint in the hallway, the plant in the corner reaching for the last bit of winter light. Nothing had moved. It was still, clean, untouched. But something in me had shifted too far to go back to how things were. I dropped my suitcase by the door, hung up my coat, and went to the kitchen to make tea. That's when I saw it. In the middle of my dining table was a folded sheet of paper. No envelope, no card, just plain white printer paper with 6 words written in blue pen. I hope you're proud of yourself. Underneath was one word, Mom. No greeting, no signature, just that cold sentence, like a knife pushed in without emotion. I stood there staring at it, the kettle humming behind me, until it clicked off. I didn't pick the paper up. I just looked at it, then turned away and poured my tea like nothing had happened. I knew they had a key. I had given it to Mom years ago for emergencies. She must have come in while I was gone. Let herself in, walked around my space, left that note, and walked out. No text, no call, just the message. It wasn't sadness I felt. It wasn't even anger. It was something quieter, like a string had snapped inside me, and instead of recoiling, I just let it fall. The next day, I was folding laundry when I heard loud knocking at the door. Before I could reach it, the lock turned. They used the key again. I heard the door open and then voices. 3 of them. Kim, Dylan, Mom. They walked in like they owned the place, like they had every right to be there. They looked different, sharper somehow, eyes full of judgment, hands tight. They didn't waste time. No greetings, no asking how I was. They started talking all at once, saying I had ruined the trip, that the children were left without anyone to watch them, that they had to rearrange everything, that Dad was so upset he didn't even go skiing, that Mom had cried, that no one had enjoyed the vacation because of me. I stood still in my living room, arms crossed, listening. Not because I agreed, not because I felt guilty, but because I wanted to see it. I wanted to hear exactly how far they'd go to protect the story they had built in their heads. They kept going. One by one, repeating the same things with different words. The problem was never their assumptions, never their control, never their lack of respect. The problem was that I hadn't played the part, that I had stepped out of line, that I had dared to exist on my own terms. They were hurt, they said, disappointed, betrayed. It wasn't fair what I had done. They needed me. The children needed me. I felt it building inside me, the tension, the disbelief, the absurdity of it all. And then suddenly, it broke, not into tears, but into laughter. I started laughing. Not loud or mean, just small, surprised laughter. It bubbled out of me without warning. I covered my mouth at first, but it kept coming. I laughed because it was so ridiculous, because I finally saw it so clearly. They stared at me like I had lost my mind. Mom's face went stiff. Kim's mouth hung open. Dylan frowned like he didn't understand the joke. I wiped my eyes, still smiling, and looked at them. I asked if they were serious, if they really thought they could take my money, my vacation days, my time, without asking, and then act shocked when I chose not to go along with it. I told them I had been helping for years, without thanks, without question, and that maybe that was the mistake. They didn't nod. They didn't apologize. They just looked hurt, like I had taken something from them. Mom said I had always helped before, that I had never said no, that this wasn't like me. And I told her, maybe that version of me was gone. The one who stayed quiet, who never made anyone uncomfortable. The one who said yes even when it chipped away at her. I told her maybe she'd raised a daughter who finally learned to protect herself. She said that if this was the kind of person I had become, maybe she didn't have a daughter anymore. There was a pause in the room. That moment when something old falls to the floor and breaks and no one reaches to pick it up. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just said, okay. And I meant it. If she didn't want to claim me as her daughter, that was her choice. I had spent my entire life trying to belong in that family, trying to earn it. I didn't realize I never had to. They left after that. No one hugged. No one looked back. They just walked out one by one, letting the door close behind them. The apartment felt even quieter than before, but not empty. It felt calm. I sat down on the couch, pulled the blanket over my lap, and closed my eyes for a moment. I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. I was free. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come back. 2 months passed. The days moved quietly, like soft waves brushing against a shore. I didn't feel the need to leave. I stopped checking the family group chat. It was still there on my phone, somewhere in the background, but I never opened it. I didn't feel curious anymore. It no longer pulled at me like it used to. The notifications that once brought a mix of anxiety and duty now meant nothing. They became part of the noise I had learned to live without. I saw their social media posts sometimes. Kim would post long captions about loyalty and family. Dylan wrote vague lines about disappointment and people who forget where they came from. Mom shared photos with sad quotes about broken bonds. None of them said my name, but I didn't have to be tagged to know. It was always aimed at me. Before, those words would have crushed me. I would have cried alone in my room, replaying old conversations and wondering what I had done wrong. But now, they felt distant, like a show I had once acted in, but no longer watched. Their disappointment didn't control me anymore. It simply existed, and I let it pass. My weekends were different now. On Saturdays, I joined a book club that met in a small coffee shop a few blocks from my apartment. It was quiet and warm, and no one asked about my family. We talked about stories, characters, and ideas. I sat with my coffee, listening, sometimes laughing. On Sundays, I walked without a destination. I stopped at parks. I wandered through small galleries. I bought apples at the farmer's market, not because I needed them, but because it felt good to take my time choosing something just for me. I started drawing again. Nothing serious, just soft pencil sketches on thick paper. I didn't share them. I didn't post them. I didn't even tell anyone I was doing it. It wasn't for approval. It was for the quiet moments when my hands needed to move and my thoughts needed somewhere to rest. In those drawings, I found pieces of myself I had forgotten. It felt like coming home, not to a place, but to a feeling. Sometimes I thought about the kids, my nieces and nephews, not with guilt, not with regret, but with a strange kind of hope. I hoped that one day they would understand, that they would grow up and notice the difference between love and obedience. That they would see that being reliable doesn't mean being used. That saying no doesn't mean you don't care. Maybe they would remember the times I played with them, cooked for them, held them when they cried. And maybe they would also remember that one year I stopped showing up in the same way. Not out of anger, but because I finally chose myself. The key my mom used to enter my apartment still sat in a drawer in my hallway. I thought about mailing it back more than once. Just slipping it into an envelope and sending it off with no note. But every time I opened that drawer and saw it, I left it there. Not because I wanted her to use it again, but because it reminded me of something. That I had given it freely, trusting it would be used with care. And now it sat untouched, a quiet symbol that some doors no longer open the way they used to. It wasn't a bridge. It wasn't an invitation. It was just a reminder that I could choose to leave. That I didn't need permission. That I didn't have to explain myself, not anymore. I didn't need to shout or prove anything. My life didn't have to be validated by people who only saw me for what I could do for them. I had always been the one who held everything together, who stayed late, said yes, gave more, bent quietly, And now I was someone else. Not louder, not harder, just free. And there was a peace in that freedom that no apology or explanation could ever match. Some might still call me selfish. They might never understand. But I've learned that choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you whole. And sometimes walking away silently is the loudest truth you can ever speak.